Hello, Life and Times of Jesus. My name is Aidan Talbot, and the three modules I am talking about today are Module 2, 3, and 4. One of the themes that stood out to me in these topics were, by following the words and lifestyle of Jesus, together we can create a more inclusive world by standing in solidarity and siding with those who have been mistreated throughout history and still today. In Module 2, I learned about what it meant to be a first-century Jew and the hardships that people at the time went through. One of the things that stood out to me in this module was the misconceptions around women and their role throughout this time period. Male writers who thought they had more authority and responsibility in society wrote many accounts about women, leading us to believe that women were inferior to men in their contributions to society and religion. However, through new studies found, many of these misconceptions that were written by misogynistic males were proven false. Jesus would heavily involve women in his ministry by speaking with them and including them in his many teachings. He wanted to acknowledge women in his community to the best of his abilities, and he respected them very highly. I quote and read this from John chapter 4. Jesus regularly addressed women directly while in the public. This was unusual for a man to do. Notice the part where it says this was unusual for a man to do. That really sticks out to me because I can't imagine now going out in public and it would be unusual for me just to talk to a woman. This goes hand in hand with the fact that Jesus' ideals and actions at the time went against the social norm. This serves still today when sometimes I need to break myself from the social norm and do what is right and inclusive for everybody. For example, I've been in a situation where my own friends in middle school would pick on a new kid who was a transgender boy by making jokes behind his back or saying rude things to his face about how he identifies and lives his life. Now, this put me in an awkward situation because I knew what my peers were doing was wrong, but I also felt the kid's pain when he would just laugh it off and walk away because he didn't want to argue with them about his identity. He would laugh it off, but inside I know that what they said was hurtful. And it felt awkward for me to tell my friends to stop because the social norm at the time made me feel like I had to side with them, when inside my heart I knew that I needed to stand up for the new kid, Evan. And I eventually standed up for Evan and told my friends that what they're doing is completely wrong. And in fact, my friends started to out me, and they thought that I was weird for standing up for him. But when I look back on it today, I don't regret a thing I did, and I'm happy with myself for doing the right thing. In Module 3, we learned about oppression and resistance movements throughout history. Some of these movements include Black Lives Matter, women's suffrage, and the Montgomery bus boycott, and the Gandhi Salt March. A big takeaway from this module would be that when you speak up about the inequalities with your fellow neighbors, you can resist and fight for what you believe in to make a change throughout the world. Not all of the resistance movements became fully resolved, but if you look at what has happened since the movements, you see that these movements truly have made an impact on the world and to how we live in society today. During his time, Jesus associated with anybody and everybody. He was open to all. This included people from different social classes such as tax collectors and the upper class, to sinners and the lower class. Viewing who Jesus associated with from an apocalyptic perspective gives you insight on the type of person he was and how he was changing the social norms. This goes hand in hand with the goals of many of these resistance movements, to sway away from the social norm and include everybody in having equal opportunities in education, work, and in society, just like how Jesus envisioned the world and lived his life. I relate to these resistance movements because I relate to these resistant movements we learned because I realized that nothing will change in the world unless it starts with myself. Recently, I've been extremely disturbed and disgusted by all the Asian hate going around the world, especially where I think it would happen last, my home, San Francisco. By talking about my disturbedness and these issues with my friends and family, I'm making a small change by sharing my experiences as a young Asian man in society and how the Asian hate resistance movement is affecting my life today. I recently joined my father in an Asian awareness panel and shared my recent experiences in the light of all this Asian hate to his whole company. I was very nervous at first to dive deep into my thoughts and personal feelings about this topic, and it made me uncomfortable to say some of the stuff. But from the feedback I got from his coworkers and my father, I realized that shedding light on my personal feelings about the subject gave people insight on how it is to be in the Asian world right now, and I hope that it also gave people some sympathy towards what is going on right now towards Asians. And so I realized that talking about inequalities and racism is healthy, and making a small difference is the first step into making a big difference and changing society for the better. Module 4 truly highlights the inequalities that women face from day to day. Early Christian women lived under the Roman Empire authorities. Many local communities handled local affairs through a council consisting of men from the wealthiest part of the community. They made a view of women as mentally and physically inferior, irrational and superstitious, which then supported the social norm that men should be in power and authority. However, Jesus' view of women was completely different. Jesus didn't believe that women were superior to men, but he often took the side of women because he sees the unfairness and hardships in the world women have to face. Jesus thinks of all the women just as he thinks of men, sons and daughters of God whom are all equal. One day at the Mountain of Olives, the Pharisees come up to Jesus with a woman who was taken under her will because she supposedly was caught in the act of adultery. The Pharisees want to stone the girl, and they ask Jesus what he had to say. Instead of Jesus giving a yes or no answers, he says, and I quote, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Everybody at the temple probably instantly thought the woman was inferior to them because she was caught in the act of sin. However, by saying this, he makes everyone realize that they are very similar to the woman as well, because everybody sins, and who are you to judge someone else based on their sins if you have your own sins and wrongdoings? This story helps me especially in life because I learn to not judge people based on something I've heard about them, and most importantly, not to think of myself as higher than someone else because of a rumor I have heard, whether it is real or not. I learned that by following what Jesus said at the Mountain of Olives, sometimes I need to look in the mirror and think about how I can better myself before making assumptions about other people. This quote also teaches me not to judge a book by its cover, rather to look at the similarities between myself and someone else so we can get along with one another at the start rather than being enemies or thinking of each other differently. By listening to the words and actions of Jesus, I can start to make the world a better place by not making assumptions of people and by sharing my experiences as long as listening to others, as well as listening to others' experiences of racism or inequality, especially the inequalities brought on women that still exist today.